Blog Talk Radio.
Live from Washington, D.C., it's Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio. QLPOR, as it's widely known, features a bevy of poets, spoken word artists, and live poetry readings with best-selling authors. Your host is Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the program. Yes, I am Michael Anthony Ingram. My special guest tonight is poet S. Yarberry. S's new book of poetry, A Boy in the City, is available now from Deep Vellum Publishing. Welcome, S, to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're with me as well. Let's begin this journey. What I'd like to know from you first is, what is poetry?
Yeah, that is a great question, and one that I think has many answers. One of my teachers in grad school, Phillips, said, I think of poetry as being more a transformation of experience rather than a transcription of it, which I've always really liked. And I think this idea of a transformation of experience, and a transformation of experience to what end? What transforms it? What does transforming it do? Transforming experience do, I think, is where, different poets will have different takes. But I've always thought that poetry is this transformation of experience rather than a transcription of it. I think that is kind of the best way I've heard it put, to borrow from Carl there.
All right. Well, let me ask this question then. It's a little different slant on it. Why is poetry important?
Yeah. I mean, I think that poetry has this power to, take the ordinary or take, someone's everyday life and, bring it into this more metaphysical existence, this more metaphysical realm where we suddenly get to have, whether we have control over it or we are able to complicate it or sit with it, whatever that experience may be. I think poetry kind of gives one the time and space to do that, and that's what has always made it feel kind of magical to me.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Please share a poem.
Sure. Great. I'll start with this poem. It comes quite early in the collection. It's called Lips Crash with Lips, Inevitable. And the title of that poem is taken or borrowed from this poem called Metaphor for Action by Muriel Rukeyser, which was a poem I really liked when I was writing this book. And also just a little note that I was reading this poem called Hang On by Ray Armantrout, which had just been published in the New Yorker that morning that I wrote this poem. And so I had that in my head too. So here we go. Lips crash with lips, inevitable. A modern catastrophe we are, you and I, blowing smoke into the wind, napping on the couch. Rain hits the windows. I doze in and out. Wet tires on the wet street. I dream of peaches that hang like lanterns in the dark. This is what we want. Sex, then rest. Sex, then rest. Anarchy, then composure. You have another lover who lives out of state. When she texts you, I think, oh nuts, my heart is so breakable. A siren starts, a fire truck glowing in the storm. Later, we'll drink beers. Our friends will wage themselves into the air. I have another love, too, It's hard to be alone. It's hard to be in love twofold. How bizarre. Barnacles are dying. How horrible to watch your life go by and want so much. Those purple mountains, rough, mouths agape. You wake me up. We kiss. Ask, what are we going to do today? What are we going to do? My whole life ignites. We'll do it all. Everything. Thank you.
Wow. I'm just allowing it to soak in.
Oh,
such a powerful work.
Thank you.
Such a powerful work. What inspired your book, A Boy in the City? Tell me everything.
Yeah. Well, I think probably my biggest inspiration was, I was falling in love, falling out of love throughout this kind of entire collection, which I think, ignited some fire there of inspiration. But I was also, I'm trans. I was kind of dealing with my gender identity during this time too. And so this kind of back and forth between, I think, intimacy and self-revelation is really what gave a spark to the fire of writing A Boy in the City.
All right. Let me ask this question. As you think about your journey, what was an early experience where you learned or discovered that poetic language had power?
Yeah, I think, one of the earliest moments that I kind of discovered poetry or got excited about poetry was, and I always feel like I wish I had like a little bit more of a cool person to cite here, but, I loved the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. I read it when I was in high school. And, we didn't read a lot of poetry in high school, so I didn't have too many options. But that one, I think, really spoke to me for whatever reason. It seemed, it seemed exciting, and the language was so different, and I hadn't read anything like that before. And it made me excited. It made me excited about language. We were asked to write a poem. It was kind of all went from there. So have that poem to thank for things.
So the rest is history then.
The rest is history, yeah.
Right. As you think about your book, what surprised you most? What did you find out? What did you discover about yourself writing this book?
Yeah, I think I really resisted writing about. I really resisted writing about my. Being transness was something that I didn't really feel comfortable writing about for a long time, even though I think it plays a significant role in the book itself. And I think that was the thing that I had to really come to terms with writing about, or finding a way to write about that felt accurate or meaningful to me. And so I'm really grateful for this book. I think it helped me work through some of those things, and that wasn't something I think I had planned on or necessarily wanted to do at every point. So I think that's what writing this taught me the most.
All right, and here's a question for you. The cover of your book is quite striking. What was the process for developing the cover?
Yeah, that is a great question. I picked a few books that I liked, which all happen to be kind of blue and have like a weird pattern on the front. So that was kind of a little aesthetic mood board. But the kind of parrot man, for those who can't see it, that's on the cover of it, is a William Blake piece of art. And so I study William Blake. I'm in a PhD program, and my area of focus is romantic poetry. I'm a big William Blake fan. He's my whole life, really.
All right.
So dramatic statement, but somewhat true.
All right.
So the designer kind of took that into consideration and picked some William Blake things to throw in there. And then, of course, we got a cityscape, since it's a boy in the city after all.
All right. I want to know more about William Blake in terms of what about him and his work inspires you.
Yeah, so William Blake's work is pretty, anti-lyric. It's not necessarily, it's not like I write like William Blake, which I think is good because he was writing in the late 1700s. But he's writing in this mode of prophecy, and he's ecstatic and creative and a total strange oddball who was such an outcast during his life. That I think I just from a very early on moment, I was drawn to the way that he wrote in this very authentic way, without necessarily, this desire to be published or to be like anyone else in his writing, which I think automatically just made him, of course, the coolest person to me, humanly possible. So, I think some of that is what's always drawn me to Blake's work.
All right. Who are some of your other writing influences?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely adore and appreciate and am in, in so much gratitude to my teachers who've been Carl Phillips and Mary Jo Bang and Mary Shebist in undergrad. Those three poets I think are all spectacular and people's work that I'm always just absolutely in awe of. And I've recently gotten to work a little bit with Natasha Trethewey at Northwestern, where I'm doing my grad degree, and I'm really grateful to her too. But yeah, I think my teachers' works are the ones that I tend to spend the most time with and learn from and go back to. But I'll also give a little shout out to Bridget Pegan Kelly and Linda Gregg, Frank O'Hara, Gerard Manley Hopkins, all sorts of good folks.
Mm-hmm. Please share another poem.
Great. Awesome. I'm going to read this poem. It's called The Wolves. I wrote this during the pandemic, which, there are a few poems in here written during that time where I was living in St. Louis and sitting on my partner at the time's porch pretty much all day, every day. It was very hot. So I wrote this poem sitting out there on that porch. The Wolves. My mind once opened like a jowl, jaw hung loose from skull. Today, though, my head feels like a swarm of swans. It feels imperfect, impertinent. The curves of birds dapple my drain pipe. Shreds of sentences approach, a portrait torn in the eye, dewlap dripping from the blades of grass, hand jobs playing inside. Filth is nothing new. I open my head like a variety show. Anything goes. A horror that started off abstract becomes utterly real. Thick the skin of an udder entered my hand. Oh pain, oh death, oh observation. Everything feels like a rickety homestead. The horror being a what? The moribund experience of knowledge entered me. The green hump of the bridge is forever behind us. A school of dreams shine in shallow waters. Silver, then blue, then back again. The light seems to come from nowhere. A dream, then the perfect morning. I don't know. What are a body and hands, a mouth, a sex? I don't know where you went. Outside the window there is a sky. Outside of myself I set down a glass of water. The day is provoking comprehension. 2 rabbits, I notice. 2 squirrels. Me doubled, then doubled again. Where was it that I was looking, or where was it that I was looking for? There's no such thing as a gilded memory. I'm sitting here open-minded. Wolves come into view. What do they want? They want me. I just know it. Thank you so much.
Gives an opportunity for me to think about your words. What I'd like to know, what are the predominant themes of your work?
Other predominant things, my work?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I work a lot with the line. I love the mystery of the line break. So that's like a big part of it. I I think, it comes from also, being preoccupied with cities. I like architecture and building and, kind of thinking structurally about what I'm saying. So, of course, I love words and textures and the sensuousness of language is, of course, one of the reasons I think poets are poets. But, yeah, the line break is something I really think about a lot and I have a lot of fun with.
All right. Let's take a brief break, and we'll be right back.
Great.
We are back. I am Michael Anthony Ingram. I'm here with S. Yarberry. The new book is A Boy in the City. A question for you, my friend. Are you ready? All right. How does a poem begin for you? With an idea, or form, or an image?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would definitely say an image is where I start my poems.
Tell me more.
Yeah. I think that for me, and I think I know a lot of poets who start with ideas, and that's really exciting. I wish I could do that. But when I try to do anything other than kind of start with, and it doesn't always have to be an image in the sense of something complex or completely well wrought in some way, but even a phrase or a single word that suddenly kind of feels anew or catches my interest, even if it's a simple word or simple phrase, something that kind of suddenly feels new to me. I think that's where I tend to start and kind of spiral outward from there. So, yeah.
A Boy in the City, as I read the information about the book, you really focus on what's internal and how it affects what's external. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
am I right?
That sounds right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Thank you very much. Who are you as a result of this book, of putting yourself on paper?
Who am I? Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that I feel more and more like not that the person that wrote this book is quite a past self by any means, but
okay.
It feels like really like a moment in time, and this kind of moment of growing as both a writer and a person, and figuring my stuff out, figuring my life out. Not that I have come to any steadfast terms of what it is to be a person, but I definitely think that this was this moment of growth, and one that I look back on as a book that kind of speaks to this moment in my life, this moment in time where I was moving cities, and I was like I said, very in love with someone, and kind of also learning kind of who I am myself. And I think kind of all of those elements felt like this really important and exciting moment in time that this book encapsulates for me, and one that I feel like I've moved on from in some ways, but will always kind of reverberate, of course, through my personal life, personal history, writing life, all that good stuff.
I like that. Some poets claim that a poem is like a living creature. Once it's out there, there's not much you can do to correct or improve it, while others edit meticulously, not leaving much from the original draft form. What is your take on it?
Yeah.
Editing.
Editing. I would say I write. I try and write. I overwrite a poem. I think I like kind of writing as much as I can in that moment where it feels where it feels like the poem is happening, and then take a little bit away, carve it out. But I would say the original is always kind of there in some kind of ephemeral form, and that is something I don't necessarily go back to edited poems and rewrite sections or something like that. My poems also aren't super long, so I think my process would probably be different if I was writing, pages and pages and pages. But I tend to whittle things down into what they are rather than expand or rewrite or cross out.
Does writing energize or exhaust you?
Writing is like the best feeling in the world to me when it happens.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I don't write. I don't write every day or anything like that. I'm pretty, I'll go for a few weeks and feel like I write, 10 poems and then not write for a couple weeks and kind of on and off like that. So to me, when I am writing, it feels really exciting rather than exhaustive, which is a feeling I hope to keep because I want to feel good writing my poems and not feel completely worn down by them. Although others have great different opinions.
Yes, they do. What do you think is the most difficult part of the artistic process? What's been the most difficult part of this whole endeavor?
The most difficult part of the process, I think, is having other people read the poems. That is what I think, if I was just writing for myself or, just not, publishing or however you want other people approach their writing life. I think, having other people look at it, the poems, is what has been the most difficult part, and not always difficult in a bad way, but I think one of the most challenging is, making yourself vulnerable to other people and known to other people in your art. It can be a scary thing. So I think that's always been what's difficult. Yeah,
I agree with that 100%. That it can be a very, very scary thing. And I want to know from you: has a poem ever humbled, one of your own poems, ever humbled or frightened you? And what did you do with it? That information. How did you process it?
Yeah, that's the last poem in my book is actually one that surprised me, and it was one that I didn't want to write. It's called Trans, is Latin for a cross. And I remember I was supposed to write a poem that it was someone, I was in a class in doing my MFA in poetry, and someone was saying we had to write a political poem, whatever that means to us. And I was really salty about having to do that. I don't know why I was very resistant to it. And I was, just a little bit angsty. But then I sat down and thought about it, and I wrote this poem. And it was one that, it really surprised me that I wrote it. It wasn't something I thought I wanted to write. And then I did, and it ended up being the last poem of my book. And I think that is both because it surprised me and is one that felt also like something I really needed to say at the same time. So that kind of unexpected turn, that's something you don't necessarily want to write, can actually be, usually is, I think, the thing you might need to say the most. Always has felt really true to me.
Well, would you be willing to share it now? I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it. Trans is Latin for a cross as in over there, beyond. The phrase life expectancy isn't sexy per se, though it is beautiful to have a life and a love, even when I think I wish I could be only a freak out, only crossing the street. I suppose there is a sense and there is a nonsense to what it feels like to be. I pose, I compose in a trance way, of course. I can't listen to sad music. Please don't make me. When I take off my shirt in the mirror, it too isn't sexy, or rarely is it sexy. I cry, and that's the truth. One past love pushed me against the wall, said, "Do you want to feel like a man?" Sure. There was a summer storm. We fucked for hours. Then she smoked while I slept. Simple. It's not that I became anything. I was, and I slept, and I sleep. It is nothing special to not want to be hurt. Thank you.
Wow. There's so much in that piece, yes. So much in that piece.
Yeah, thank you.
What is the purpose of that particular piece of poetry? Talk to me. What's the purpose?
Yeah, I think the purpose of it was to, for me, I think starting to identify as trans was a big, obviously a big step for anyone, and it was a big step for me too, and something that I was dealing with and not feeling comfortable with. So I think part of writing this poem was kind of taking that identity and that idea of being trans and transness, and really kind of pushing myself to think about it as both an identity and a word, and what that meant to me. And so I think that was what I was grappling with in that poem.
Right. Many times I've been asked over the years, what does it mean to be an African-American male poet? And I'd share a number of different things in terms of what the struggle has looked like and how that shaped my identity. What does it mean for you to be a trans poet?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. And I think for me, I'm someone who's, writing poems that don't always read as trans. I'm not always talking about gender or transness in every poem forthright, which I think is what can feel kind of complicated to some people, or whatever, is that it's not, my identity isn't being necessarily announced in every poem. A lot of them are just between an I and a U, and in the book, right, you get kind of all this context because other poems are talking about different things. So I've been thinking about that as something that, where, like, what does it mean to be a trans poet? What does it mean to write a trans poem? I'm not sure. I think that's something I'm still working through, and something I, am still thinking about, although it's certainly on my mind a lot. So yeah, I don't have a good answer, but it's a good question.
Well, I mean, even for me, as I think about being an African-American male poet, not all of my poetry centers around, quote, African-American issues. And sometimes people expect that to always be the case, that it always does, but there's more to me than just that. There's a world around that I'm a part of. So I can understand.
Yeah.
And like you, I'm still trying to figure it out too. So I thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. When you write poetry, is a poem letting your guard down or building a wall?
Oh, I love that question. I think it is the one place I let my guard down, although I also think people find some of my poems a little bit mysterious, which has been interesting I think to talk to people who are close to me who've read my poems. Because, I think it is the one place I try to be, as honest or forthright as possible, but sometimes that comes out in these kind of occlusive ways or something. But that's, I really like that question a ton. All right. Hey, I'm glad we're bonding. I like that. I like that. Please share another poem.
All right.
All right. Let's see. All right. I'm going to read this poem called Dirt, and I don't think this one needs too much of an introduction.
Okay.
But yeah. Okay. It's called Dirt. It was the gray cat with the robin in his mouth, or you flicking your cigarette off the porch that first warm night of April, when I began wondering how this would all pan out. This all meaning nothing other than you and I, our languaged urge to be jointed. Hidden from the sense of things is our leitmotif of daily drama. A man plays the fiddle and a skateboarder speaks loud French. Day wisps off into another cast iron night. Night makes all too clear our real bad burdens. I shuck my burdens for some universal truth. Truth never being the balm it should, I come out empty-handed. One time, early, before you had heard some damp secret from my screwball past, you sat on my lap in your big pink robe, wielding a glass of wine. We spoke only of southern ticks and surefire obscurities. We each let our voices sprawl out over the silent swamp of all we could not know. I don't know you at all, you said. The swamp grew deeper then, or longer. You come into the kitchen when I call you, your hand scooping up a beetle gentle as ash. Ash falls often from where I'm standing. The beetles never flutter, just crawl unromantically across the soft brown tiles. Nowhere to go, nowhere to be, I sing out. The thing is, when I say your name, you always answer, and when you say mine, it's like a door slamming shut. The cicadas will start any day now, their voices forming like a thick wool cloth through the air. That collective voice rubs up against you, gets in your shirt and your head. I want to be so unseen, it hurts sometimes. If I could be dirt, I would. Thank you.
Wow. Oh, I like that. Would you read that one again for me? Oh, I like that. Please read it again.
Yeah, you want me to read the poem again?
Yes, I'd love it.
All right. Dirt. It was the gray cat with the robin in his mouth, or you flicking your cigarette off the porch that first warm night of April, when I began wondering how this would all pan out. This all meaning nothing other than you and I, our languaged urge to be jointed. Hidden from the sense of things is our leitmotif of daily drama. A man plays the fiddle and a skateboarder speaks loud French. Day wisps off into another cast iron night. Night makes all too clear our real bad burdens. I shuck my burdens for some universal truth. Truth never being the balm it should, I come out empty-handed. One time early, before you had heard some damp secret from my screwball past, you sat on my lap in your big pink robe wielding a glass of wine. We spoke only of southern ticks and surefire obscurities. We each let our voices sprawl out over the silent swamp of all we could not know. I don't know you at all, you said. The swamp grew deeper then, or longer. You come into the kitchen when I call you, your hand scooping up a beetle gentle as ash. Ash falls often from where I'm standing. The beetles never flutter, just crawl unromantically across the soft brown tiles. Nowhere to go, nowhere to be, I sing out. The thing is, when I say your name, you always answer, and when you say mine, it's like a door slamming shut. The cicadas will start any day now, their voices forming like a thick wool cloth through the air. That collective voice rubs up against you, gets in your shirt and your head. I want to be so unseen, it hurts sometimes. If I could be dirt, I would.
Oh. Oh, something about that piece of poetry really resonates with me. Maybe it's the last line. If I could be dirt, I would. Oh, it's something. Thank you for your willingness to share it with me again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Think
Thank
about
you so much.
what is your relationship between your speaking voice and your written voice? Do you spend a lot of time on the stage? Or you do a lot of open mics? Those types of things? Is there a relationship between the two, your speaking voice and your written voice?
Yeah, that's that's tricky. I think that I didn't do a lot of performance or anything like that. And I've done some readings, through the years and all of that, which has helped a lot. Both with just one, being nervous, and two, kind of learning how to talk in front of people. And there was this poet I met with once, and she was saying that, don't do, a poetry voice, do just like say the poem exactly how you would say it, just like talking to your friends. And I think it's great advice, and one that I've always thought about and do try to channel, although I think it can be, I think it's more difficult than it sounds to just read a poem like you're reading it to your friends. But something I haven't internalized in a way, and I think about that advice a lot, and I think it's some good one. Yeah, it's a good one.
Please share another piece.
Yeah, definitely. So this poem's called Two Children Threatened by a Nightingale, which is a title of a Max Ernst painting. And I have a lot of poems in here that are taking kind of surrealist paintings. Some take their titles, others are just more generally kind of have moments of those paintings, this kind of ekphrastic moment of those works kind of come in here and there. So anyways, this is one, Two Children Threatened by a Nightingale, which is two children threatened by a nightingale. Attracted to the guise and not the object, light coming or going creates a time of day. This happened. This did happen. If the story is about a woman, let us call her Ark. The story goes fruit flies, horses, delinquent power. Or the story goes a burning, there is no more house. When I speak of gentleness, I speak of desire. What does the nightingale have that I don't have? Position, relief. I am tired of attraction. A snake moves across dried leaves. I wish for a doorway. If I was the prince of birds, who could hurt me? You couldn't. Thanks.
Tell me more about that particular piece. Who are you in conversation with? Who are you talking to?
Yeah, I think I was talking to the painting as itself, the object, and kind of having a conversation with not really anyone in particular in the painting, but just the painting, and reflecting on it and letting it kind of guide where I was at in that moment, but kind of having that as a route to where my mind was wandering off to. Yeah.
Now, when you think about poetry in general, your work, how important is accessibility? And my question is, should one have to work hard to solve a poem?
I don't think that I don't want any of my poems to be inaccessible personally.
All right.
I also think that, I think that poetry is also, it's art, and, I think there are going to be more abstract poems and more maybe readily, if not readily accessible, maybe readily, interactable than other people's work. And I guess I just say that in that I think that, I don't necessarily strive for accessibility as one of my, things at the forefront of when I'm writing. But I also don't want to be completely, completely inaccessible either. But for instance, like I could hear someone saying, well, what if someone, doesn't know that painting that you've, named your poem after or whatever? like, I don't want you to have to know the name of that painting for the poem to make sense. You know what I mean? Or for someone to get something out of the poem. So I kind of try to, like, work kind of within that idea of, like, oh, if you know this painting, you'll have one reading of it. If you don't know that painting, you'll, you know, have a different reading of it, and both should totally work, in my opinion. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's take a brief break, and we'll be right back.
Great.
We are back. I'm enjoying my conversation with S. Yarberry. And S, here's a question for you.
Great.
All right. What role should a title play in a poem?
Yeah, I think there are many different roles a title can play. I think that titling is something I will say I've never been very good at. My teachers were always like critiquing my titles. When I was in writing workshops, people are like the poem is working, but the title doesn't make any sense or whatever. So I don't know if I should be an authority on how to title a poem. But one really good piece of advice that I got from one of my teachers at one point was, when you're editing your poem and you're taking things out or you're moving things around, especially those phrases and that language that you take out of the poem often can be moved to the title, because, you know, you're taking them out as something as excess. But, you know, they were originally part of the poem, or they were originally there in that kind of initiating idea of what the poem is or means, and that language can kind of become like this great word bank, or great, like, you know, source of phrases that might work as potential titles of that poem. And so that's been a piece of advice I am really grateful to have heard and use a lot when thinking about titling my poems. So hopefully,
all right, very nice.
That helps someone. Yeah.
Yes, very nice. It helped me. All right. You know,
Okay.
they say that to see the world with complete honesty, one should look to comedians, musicians, artists, and poets. All right? What do you think emerges naturally from your work? What emerges from you?
What emerges from me? I think what most emerges from me is, you know, I think a lot of my poems, right, are looking around these different places I am, and sometimes it's looking at a computer screen of a painting, or sometimes it's looking, you know, out the door or out the window or whatever, and, you know, thinking about how this kind of, you know, exterior world, you know, can most mimic kind of the internal workings of my mind, or how I'm feeling. And so I'm always kind of interested in this friction between the abstract idea or the abstract emotion and then the solidity of the world of around me, around us. And so I'm always kind of trying to put into friction, I guess, that exterior world with the interior one. And I think different things come in different moments, but that's kind of how I think that's what I'm doing. And so hopefully what I'm producing as well. Yeah.
You know, I was reading where Carl Phillips made the statement that Yarberry is a defiant new voice who writes past the festoonery of gender and easy binaries. My question is, our world, there's so much happening. There's so much happening, good, bad, and indifferent. What do you see as being the role of a poet in modern-day society?
Yeah, yes. The role of the poet is, I think the role of the poet goes back to, circle back to what I had brought up earlier from what Carl Phillips has said of poetry, right? That poetry can transform experience, right? That the poet, I think, isn't just this transcriber of what's going on, but someone who's taking what's going on and being able to transform it, and not transform it necessarily into something that it isn't, but, transform it into something that can speak to other people, can, speak to, different communities, different, different places. I'm interested in that kind of idea of the poem as a transformative medium rather than a transcriptive one. And I think the role of the poet has something to do with that. And I think there are many roles of poets, and people can have all sorts of different roles as a poet, of course. But one that I think really interests me is this one of someone who can transform experience into something, into a poem, into something that feels kind of like a core of that experience itself in some way.
Tell me more about this transformational piece. I'm fascinated by it. Just speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and like I said, I'm borrowing this from Carl Phillips.
Yes.
And, I think it has to do with this kind of the creativity of the poet, or the ability for the poet to not just see something happening and write it down, but being able to see that and interpret it, or, make something of it that it in and of itself maybe it doesn't make, or kind of, to show its complexities, to, make it as tenuous as it actually is, even if just transcribing it would maybe fall flat in some way, right? That, even if, you're sitting on your porch brokenhearted looking at the world, right? That's one sentence. But, how can the poet take something like that is both everyday and also extraordinarily monumental, and kind of make it as monumental as it is to that individual, right? That's like that transformative process that I think the poet takes on, rather than the transcriber or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I'm thinking.
It does.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking also that Carl Phillips sounds like an amazing man. I'm glad that he's in your life, because I'm learning from him through you. So I like that. Thank you so much for sharing again. Please share another poem. Share another poem, my friend.
Great. Sure. I will, I'm going to read this poem. It's called The Scholar. And yes, anything interesting to say right off the bat? This poem, I'll read. It doesn't really have any signifiers of this anymore, but this was a poem I feel like I actually is one that I really spent a lot of time on, and kind of had this method of collage going, where I was writing these kind of different little things that kept not cohering into a single poem, and then I kind of slowly but surely realized they were all the same poem. And so that's kind of how this poem came into being. And it's called The Scholar. The sentence became a medium for desire to traverse. Then a livelihood began to take place. The difference was all in the performance. I dress up at night and watch the bugs fuck beneath the porch light. I wish to end it all. It rains again. There is an exhaustive sort of brutality to my life. a mundane existentialism that leans in close to the death clatter of that epistemic grid of what it means to be another undone suicide. I put the television on, a show, radiant theater of sitcoms where suicide does not exist, the hard word, the concept, the oblivious object. An addiction, this idea. If I enter the myth, what desires will I have to fill? If I find myself asking again. I have often needed to save my life. A methodology to my existence is desirable, thing excruciatingly formal. I speak in polemics, eternal and infernal. It's not really playful, the ending of my life, though theatrics are certainly involved. To cohere to the world we make ourselves up in. I twirl my arm around like a windmill, a chainsaw. I pray to Aphrodite with a penny in my mouth. There is a life we live and a life we forget. When the trees blow back and forth in the cold November wind, I think them torsos and heads shaking wildly in my window, occupying the trees do the corner of my eye. I can only think posthumously these days. The fire in my heart has gone kaput from etre capot, to be without tricks in a card game. My heart is out of tricks and the game has gone sour. There's a beach down the street that I never make it to. The texts gone unanswered, the emails, the calls. Sorry, I'm always chuckling. What is one to do? How malleable a lifetime of displeasure can be. Nightly I swarm. Nightly I consider stars and winter mornings. I read theory on the discursive limits of sex, purpose, a charming little polemic to call a war upon my own polytropos self. This self that did nothing really. The trees swerve outside. Of course I want to die. The trees swerving. Nightly I string myself up. Thank you.
Wow. Just give me a minute.
Sure.
To process.
Definitely.
I'm going to ask you a question that I've never asked anyone else. You're the very first. And if you can't answer it, it's okay. All right?
Okay.
Where does your poetic doubt begin and where does it end?
Where does my poetic doubt end and where does it begin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Where does it begin and where does it end? Yes.
Yeah, I think that my poetic doubt, my poetic doubt, I think, begins after that first version of the poem. After I write the first, version of that poem, there's suddenly a lot of doubt that comes of whether or not, it makes sense, if it's worthwhile, if it is even an important thing to say. I think, that is where it begins, and it ends in that act of editing or active kind of going through it word by word, line by line, stanza by stanza, and really trying to find whether or not those words need to be there or if they're being said in the right way or what they're saying is what, I want to cohere. I think that kind of process is where both the doubt begins and also hopefully where it ends as well.
All right. I like that. Thank you. And thank you for being the first one to answer that question. You did an incredible job. I appreciate it. I really do. Because I didn't even know what the question meant. So you did an outstanding job.
Great.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Happy to do it.
Thank you. We live in a world, and this has changed so much in terms of technology. Do the internet and social media contribute to the well-being of poetry?
Oh, yeah. I think yes, it does. I think there are just so many poems that I am so grateful to have found, and I don't think I would have ever seen if the internet did not exist. Maybe I would have. I have no idea. But I think that social media in particular is where I find a lot of poems and poets that I don't usually come across or aren't in my immediate circles, or are poems from a long time ago that, you know, I completely missed or weren't on my radar. So I think they play a pivotal role in I think, you know, how poems are accessed and found and discovered. So I think it's pretty important and ultimately good.
Yeah. I like that. Another poem, please. Another poem.
Sure. Great. This poem is called Boyhood. It's called Boyhood, and I don't think there's anything you need to know about this one.
All right.
Great. Boyhood. I saw something live. It was a beautiful thing, and easy, like a blue jay shimmering in the light. I stood there in the buzzing snow, her eyes glaucopic as she sang, what if, into the silence. We were living together in this place. We shrugged off all other truths. It was hard at first, the blankness, the wanting. Then it was all I had. I stood still in the buzzing snow, playing the hum of a copper opera in my mind. What if I unknot what I need to say and still cannot say it? Irresponsible, irresistible, an extravagant lack of an extravagant thing. Thank you.
Oh. You know, I know that you love William Blake. And here's the question. If you were a poet during a different era, when, where would you want to exist?
So would I want to be William Blake is the question.
Okay. Tell me more.
No, that's, oh my gosh, yeah, that's a really interesting question to ask. I mean, I think that William Blake is also a, phenomenal visual artist. He was most known for his visual art. And for that, I think I would love to be William Blake in his not only capacity as a poet, but also as a printmaker, and his ability to really illuminate these aspects of poetry in the visual arts is something I really would admire, and I think would be an amazing thing to get to do. So I'll pick him. All right. Yeah.
You'll take William for 500. All right. I like that. We have time for one more poem. But before you do that, I want to ask this question. I know you're probably tired of me by now, but I want to know, if you think you were meant to be a poet?
Was I meant to be a poet?
Yes.
I hope so, because it's where I have ended up, and I quite like it. So
okay.
I'll say yeah, definitely. Yes.
Oh, I like hearing that too, because you're quite a poet. Quite a poet. Well, one more poem, as I said, one more poem for the road before we end our journey together. Give us one more.
All right. This poem is called Castles. And speaking of poems and titles and all of that, this was one I really struggled to title, but I think the title is good the way it is now, but it wasn't.
All right.
All right. So Castles. All right. Once I watched the ocean rise up on its miraculous haunches, blue and cursed to fall within itself forever. I was a child and frightened by power. I listened and opened doors for strangers. There is a certain dread that comes along with being human. We are castles of what? Patterns and sex. I know I am destroying the romance of this all. I hope you got everything you wanted, the nurse said as I left. I imagine we listen to others when we fail ourselves. This, though, was never quite failure. The world flexed, and I was flown. my body aching for the anatomy of boyhood. Thank you.
Wow. S, what piece of advice would you give to your readers? And you may have already answered this before, but I just want to hear it one more time. What piece of advice would you give us as your readers? The one piece of advice I would give to, I think, read a lot of poetry. I think reading and reading and reading is the best way to read poetry, and reading things outside your usual interests or zones of comfort, and all of that is what has made me excited about poetry, and I think that's just a good piece of advice in general. So, yeah. Well, I sense your excitement. Where can listeners find your work? Where can they find your work?
Yeah, they can. You can pre-order A Boy in the City. It's coming out July 26th. So you can Google A Boy in the City, deep vellum, whatever, and find it. So if you're interested in the collection, that's how to do that. But yeah, I have some poems online. I have a website, syarberry.com, and I have all sorts of links and all that good stuff on there. So yeah.
All right. Finally, what is next in the works for you?
Yeah, I'm working on book number 2 right now. I'm excited about it, and it's coming together. So that's where where all my energy is going. Creative energy is going now is to some new work, which hopefully comes together. I think it will, though.
I'm sure it will. I want to thank you for joining me tonight. I learned so much. I learned new perspectives, and that's always important to stay open to new perspectives about lived experiences. That's so important. So I want to thank you for that. I wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a wonder. Your questions were really phenomenal, and I really appreciate that. It was a great time.
Well, that's why they pay me the big bucks, S.
Yeah.
Nobody pays me any bucks.
Yeah.
I'm glad you think that. That makes me happy. That makes me very, very happy. All right. Good night to you, S. You've got a new fan in me. You've got a new fan. All right.
Great.
And to our listening audience, I want to thank you, as always, for tuning in. And as I share every week, let poetry ring somewhere throughout the land. Good night, everybody. Until next time.
Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio, is available on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. You can also check out the website at qlpor.com.